Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started. And I just wanted to mention a little bit about the painting before we get started. This is the painting we will be doing. It's a beautiful sunset. And it's actually not as difficult. I always say that, I know. It's not as difficult as it looks. And you'll find out as you go along when you break it down into steps, and it's very you'll be learning how to blend in the clouds to get this kind of voluminous effect in the clouds, and it's really not as difficult as it looks when you break it down into steps. One thing I did want to mention about colors in this painting, I'm using a little bit of phthalo blue in this sky, and also I'm mixing the phthalo blue with red in order to get my purple here. Now, not everybody has phthalo blue, and you don't really need to have it in order to do this painting. So I do want to just mention, if you don't have phthalo blue, what you can do in the sky to add just a little hint of green to your blue, just in the sky, and that will give it the look of the phthalo blue. If you add just a tiny, tiny bit of green to your blue, it will give it the same effect as the phthalo blue in the sky. Now, when we go to use the phthalo blue for making purple, definitely don't add your green to it then. But I'll remind you that when we get to that point. If you're not using the phthalo blue. Okay, so that being said, let's just get started. We're gonna dive right into this painting, start working on the sky first, and put this right over here. And to start with, I'm going to be using my large flat brush. The three basic brushes I'm using for this painting: a large flat, a medium round, so something with a little bit of a point to it, and just a small little detail brush. We might end up using this, maybe, maybe not, but it's good to have it just in case. Okay, but we're going to start the painting with this large flat brush, and hopefully everybody's got their palette all set and some water in a bowl. And let's get started. Well, I am going to put everybody on mute to start, but if you have any questions along the way, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can also text me or send me a message through Instagram. Especially, that works really well, especially if you want some help with a specific detail on your painting. That way I can kind of zoom in on it if you text it to me, and that I can help you a little bit better that way. Okay, so let's just get started. Using that large brush, let's go ahead and put it in the water. And I'm going to just mix up a little bit, just get a little bit of phthalo blue on there and add some water to it. Just adding water to phthalo blue to get it. And of course, if you're not using phthalo blue, just add a little green to it. But just adding, for everyone else, just add a little bit of water to your phthalo blue. And come on down, I'd say a little more than halfway down your painting, and just put a line in there. Just a line right across. Don't worry about it if it drips like mine just did. Just get yourself a little line in there. That drip will somehow be incorporated into the painting. So I came down a little further than halfway down the painting and just put a line with a very watery phthalo blue in there. Okay, and once you've got that line in there, stretch that blue up into the sky as best you can. Just really get it as thin as you possibly can here. And the way you do that is just go back and forth, pulling that paint up into the sky, then go back over it. Just stretch that paint as thin as you can. Just this is the bottom part of our sunset. We want it to be really light blue here. And in this case, that means just a really watery blue. So keep on going, get a little bit of a workout. This is a Zoom painting class and workout. 2 for 1. So I probably stretched that blue as far as I possibly could. Okay, so now once you've really got a nice thin light blue here, I'm going to lighten it up even more by just adding a little bit of white to the bottom area. So right on top of it, all I'm doing is taking that same brush and just dipping it a little bit in my white paint. Start right at the bottom and just lighten it up even more by adding a little bit of white paint. And you can stretch this up a little ways if you like. I'm not going too heavy with the paint at all. I actually want to keep it pretty thin here because I want it to dry fast. And just a little bit of white. You can even bring it up into the sky. Okay, so something like this. Okay, so once you've got your little bit of white down here in the light blue, a very thin layer of light blue, phthalo blue, I'm going to keep on coming up into the sky with my phthalo blue. Now, no need to rinse off your brush. But you're going to start getting a little bit thicker with your blue now. As you go up into the sky, it's still going to be kind of watery, but it's going to start getting a little bit darker as we go. So what we want to see here is a gradual transition of this blue getting darker and darker as it goes up into the sky. Now, one thing I wanted to mention here too, as well, feel free to wrap this paint around the edge of the canvas like this, if you'd like to have a nice finished look to your painting and not have to think about framing it. You can just kind of wrap whatever color touches the sides, you can wrap it around the edge. So keep on going up into the sky, getting a little bit darker with each row that comes in there. I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal in the sky. But if that's not your thing, then you can put that paint on there any way you like. So it's starting to get darker, a little thicker in the paint as we go up towards the top. Still not too thick though. I'm really stretching this paint. You have to remember we're putting other colors on top of this glue, so we do need it to dry eventually. So it did get a little darker, the blue, as it came up into the sky, but again, not too thick. I stretched that paint as best I could so that it will dry quickly. That sound you just heard was a sneezing kitten. I have a kitten with a cold over here, but he's getting better. All right. So now we've got that beautiful transition, a lighter blue to a darker blue. What I'm going to do now is show you how to start bringing in the shapes of the clouds into the sky. Our first step with the clouds is actually going to be pretty basic. In fact, we're going to continue using the large brush for this step. But we're going to make some purple. We'll make our own purple. I just got your text, Sophie. You're loving your fancy paints already. I'm so glad. It does make a big difference. Okay, so making the purple, we're going to take that large brush and keep that blue on there. And all I'm going to do is add a little bit of red. Now this is that point where if you had been adding green to your blue to make the sky color, you don't want to add green to this. This is just pure blue and red to make purple. I happen to be using the phthalo blue, but just take a little scoop of red, large brush, and just blend your blue and red together. Try to make a good, nice size pile of this. And you want your purple to be on the bluer side than red. And it's going to be nice and dark when you mix it. Nice and dark, dark purple. Okay, so just blue and red, a little heavier on the blue than on the red. Okay, so to start with the clouds, just really, really basic shapes. We're kind of laying a foundation for putting the orange and yellow highlights on the clouds. The first one I want to do is just starting up in this right corner, just start getting a little shape in there. Just by bringing in some dark on the right corner, like this. Just kind of start to bring some of this darker purple into the right corner like this. Just bring a little bit of paint in there. Let's just get this cloud formation started. Now, once you've got a little bit of paint in there, let's stretch it on down like this. Just give it a little stretch across the sky. And I'm not using a lot of paint here, just whatever I put down, I'm just going to stretch it on out across the sky. See how it kind of dropped a little bit? Just bring in that blue or bluish purple on the right, and then just let it stretch across the sky. Not using a lot of paint. And now I'm gonna, without even adding any more paint, just kind of mess up the sides a little bit by taking my brush, very light pressure, and just kind of lightly going over where the edge of that line is. Just break up the line a little bit, break it up a bit with a light pressure. You can do that on the top and on the bottom. Just break the line up a bit. I'm using a very light pressure, very, very light. And look at my brush. I'm just kind of barely, barely touching the canvas. And all I'm doing is messing up that line a bit so it's not a hard line. And remember, this is just the start. We're just the very base. I'll pull this up a little bit closer so you can see it better. Okay, can everybody see that? So I just did a line, a purple line coming down at a little bit of an angle like that. And then without adding any more paint, very softly brushed over the line just to kind of break it up so it's not such a hard line. Is that making sense to everybody? If you're having any trouble with it, just text me a picture. Now I'm going to keep going so that we don't concentrate too much on it, getting any detail in here, or even worrying too much about this line and getting it just right. Because remember, this is just the base, just the foundation of the clouds. Okay, I'm going to just get a little bit more paint on my brush, a little bit more of that purple paint. Come down about halfway down the sky. I'm going to do another line here. And starting kind of the same way, just put a line in there. Just put a line in, kind of coming down at a little bit of an angle to start. Starting the same way, just put a little line in there to get started. Okay, and now I'm going to do something a little different with this line though. This one, I'm going to give some little lumps and bumps along the way. Switch it up a little bit. So there's few little lumps and bumps in this line, but then it just flat lines and goes right across the sky. So see that? I put some little lumps, interesting little lumps and bumps in there. They don't have to be exactly like that, but something like that. It's nice. Just some little lumps and bumps in there. Once you get your little lumps and bumps in there, the same process that we did up here, very barely touching that. Just gonna stretch out that cloud a little bit. Pull it down. Not adding any more paint, I'm just kind of pulling it down all the way across. Just kind of going over it with a very light brush. This is a really nice technique to learn when you're painting in layers like this, is that you can just kind of, once you get your line down there, you can just kind of go over that line with a soft pressure, and boy, does it create some really beautiful effects with blending. Very soft pressure. I am really just barely touching the canvas with this brush. Okay, I'm going to keep on going with these clouds and just do one more little one a little bit further down here. This one is very little, so just adding a tiny bit more paint to my brush. This is the purple paint, just a tiny bit more. Just going to come down a few inches, starting the same way, just bring a little line in there. And just very lightly stretch it across the sky. Very light, just a very light little line. And then the same way we did the others, just kind of softly go over it. Just blend it in a little bit. Barely there, barely there. I'm using a very light pressure here. Okay, so I'm going to move on fairly quickly to this bottom part of the painting down here, because we don't want to spend too much time thinking about these dark clouds in the sky, because most of them are going to get covered anyways. So as long as you've got something of a foundation in there, you're doing great. So now we're going to take that same purple we've been working with and literally just fill in with a very light, watery purple. Just fill in all the rest of the canvas down here. And that's just going to be the same purple we've been working with. We're just going to add a little bit of water to it to get it nice and kind of the same way we did the bottom part of the sky. Just get a light purple. So just start, get your line right at the bottom of the sky. Just kind of come across. And just fill this whole area in so there's no more white on the painting with this purple. And don't worry if it's not this perfectly straight line. There's definitely the possibility of hills happening off in the distance. Totally open to that. And just go ahead and fill in the rest of this white with this beautiful purple. Okay, if at any point I'm going too fast for anybody, just let me know. Take yourself off speaker and say, slow down. But, okay, so now we've got this purple at the bottom. One thing I want to do, and actually, if I just show you, it's much easier. So I want to just put a little hint of something going on. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that yet because I want to get the sky in first before I do this little area here. Never mind, forget I said that. We'll do something else first. Okay, what we're going to do first is bring in a little bit of highlight into our land area here. So a little bit of highlight. And all that is that same watery purple we were just working with. Just take a little corner of it and add a little bit of white. Just add a little bit of white. So you should have a little bit, kind of a light lavender purple. Kind of barely there. And just take your brush and draw a couple, or I should say paint. Just paint a couple of little lines across the canvas like that. This is in the land area. Just a couple of them, just to give ourselves a little hint of highlight going on here. Just maybe 2 lines, maybe 3.
Could you show us how light your color is?
So I just added some white to it, but I'm working on wet paint, so it's not going to show up really well. This is going to be a real subtle little highlight in here. So I did add a good amount of white to that, but it's still just kind of barely going to show up on my wet paint, and that's okay. It's just lightening it up a little bit. Just a couple of lines in there. We're going to add more highlights later anyways. Let me get it a little closer so you can see that. Okay, so once we've got a little bit of highlight, and it's very simple, no detail at all, just a couple of lines down here in this land area, just a few little lines that will show up later as being highlights. But I think what we're going to do is give this a moment to dry down here. Let this area dry. And we're going to start bringing in some beautiful sunset colors into the sky. Hopefully everybody's sky is nice and dry now. Can you feel it? And just make sure. It should be dry because we were going with barely there paint. Mine is perfectly dry. Does everyone else have a dry sky? All right. So what I'm going to do now.
My power just went out.
What? Really? Oh no. Okay, so let's get into the oranges in the sky. And we'll start after you get a nice clean large brush. Make sure there is no blue whatsoever left on that brush. We're going to start by making a very light orange. So take a nice big chunk of yellow paint and then just add a tiny little drop of red to it. So a good amount of yellow, tiny bit of red to get a really nice light orange. A light orange. Okay, like that. Nice light, bright orange. Okay, so with that large brush, the first thing I want to do is just take it right at the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry, add a little bit of white to that mixture. Add a little bit of white to it. Add a little bit of white to that mixture. There we go, nice and bright, sunset-y orange. And just come right to the bottom of the sky and very lightly just kind of bring a line in there. Now I'm barely touching the canvas, so it's not a solid line coming on in here, just a little bit of a lightly painted in line. And then once you've got it in there, use that same technique we used in the clouds and very lightly just brush the paint around it. Go over it very softly so it starts to blend around it. Very softly, go back and forth. Now, once you've got a little bit of that light color on there, I'm going to mix another light color without even switching out my brush. Just going to bring in some more red. Bring in a little more red and a little more white to that mixture. So kind of making a pinky, bringing some pinky color in there. A little more red, a little more white. Bring it right into that mixture. Get a real vibrant sunset color. A little more red, a little more white. And this time I'm just going to bring in lines of the pink. Just little lines going across the sky. Okay. So I've turned my brush so that it's creating thin lines. This is the large brush. It's going to create some thin lines coming across the sky right at the bottom. Nice little sunset line. Did you already? Okay, so we're just adding a little more white to that mixture. Take this in layers, add a little bit more white. Just bring in another layer of a sunsetty color down here. Only going a couple of inches up into the sky here. And these lines are very thin, just bringing in some thin horizontal lines. And you can go as light as you want with it. If you want to add more white, experiment a little bit more by going a little lighter, go for it. Sunsets are kind of all different colors, so you have a lot of flexibility in here. If you don't like one color, just add another one on top of it. Okay, so let's continue. Oops. Let's continue getting some of these colors up into the sky. But first, we're going to switch out to a different brush. Okay, so go ahead and set that large brush in the water. We're going to switch it on over to our medium-sized brush. Medium-sized round brush. And I'm just going to keep on going back into that sunsetty color I was just using with the red. You can make more of it if you like. Red, yellow, white. Get a nice sunsetty color there. Okay, and just get it onto your medium-sized round brush like this. And let's start by bringing in, how about right underneath this big dark cloud? Let's bring a line in there, a nice heavy line right underneath the cloud. I'm just going to bring it in first. A little line in there. Now I'm going to work rather quickly with this because I want it to blend. So don't worry if you're not doing it at the same pace as me. Just kind of watch and see. And then so that's that red, white, and yellow combination.
Okay.
Okay. And once you've got that line there, you're going to start blending it up into the cloud, just by kind of messing up the top part of the line. And I'm using, I'm just kind of moving my brush around at the top part of the line, kind of dotting it around, dabbing that paint while it's still wet, just to kind of start moving it up into the darker cloud. Just taking that bottom line and mess it up, bring it up towards that dark cloud. Just kind of, it's kind of using a scrubby sort of motion. Scrubbing it, dabbing it, any way you can to just kind of bring that color up towards the darker cloud. So it's not a hard line. Okay, so once you've got your color in there, just add a little bit of white. Take a little bit of white with that brush. And just right at the very bottom, get a nice little highlight in there. Right at the bottom. And then just kind of blend it in to the color above it. So just having a little light highlight right at the very bottom of the cloud. And then just let it kind of blend its way into the cloud a bit. Now this doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line, it's a cloud, so it can kind of dip down a bit if you want. So you want it to be nice and light at the bottom. Now I'm going to move a little bit quickly through the clouds because it's best to do this while they're wet. So try to keep up with it, but if not, you can just kind of get the basic idea and then come back in and fill in the shapes. Okay, so I'm going to keep on going because I want to work with this paint while it's still wet. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit more of that orangey color. That sunsetty orange color. I think I'll bring in a little line kind of right in here to break up the blue a bit. And then mess it up a little bit. And then add a little light highlight on the bottom. So this is pretty much a theme we're going for here. You put the line in there, you put the color in, and then you're just adding a little white highlight at the bottom. And then you mess it on up. Okay, I'm going to keep on going. Add another layer of the sunsetty color into the clouds up here. Now these are not going to be straight lines. I'm going to get some nice little swirly things going on in here. So again, using that medium-sized brush, going into that sunset color, that yellow, red, and white. I'm just going to come somewhere underneath this cloud formation over here. And this time I'm just going to get a little bit of an interesting shape going on here. Something like that. It's pretty close, staying pretty close to the cloud. It's just not a perfectly straight line. I'm letting it kind of get a little bit curvy. Let it kind of make its way across. And once you've got that line in there, same thing we've been doing, just kind of mess it up at the top using a dotting motion. Just mess up that paint. If you're unsure, just kind of watch for a minute, get a feel for it, and then try it yourself. Just kind of pulling that orangey color up into the purple of the cloud a bit. And then same thing we've been doing with all the other clouds, adding a nice little highlight at the bottom. And let it blend its way up into the cloud a little bit. So adding a little bit of white at the bottom, let it blend its way up into the cloud a little bit. If you're unsure, just watch for a few minutes, get a feel for it. Of course, everybody's clouds are going to be a little different. Don't worry if yours doesn't look anything like mine, that's okay. Just try to get the basic idea of your brightest highlight at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to go in with one more layer in here. That same medium brush, that same sunsetty orange. And this time I'm going to come in somewhere up here and just bring in an interesting little shape in here. That's going to make its way across the clouds. Again, somewhere in this shadowy color over here, break it up a bit. And just kind of have it weave across the sky. And just kind of scruffing it in there. Once you've got it on there, just kind of move the paint around, get it a little bit scruffy. It can totally connect to another cloud if you wanted to. And then just bring some white in at the bottom. The clouds always take a little bit of playing around with. Don't worry if it doesn't come out exactly the way you want it the first time you do it. You may have to go back in a couple of times. And again, I'm just adding white to the bottom and letting it kind of blend its way up. And just kind of keep on playing with it. I'm going to add a little bit in here too to break up that blue a little bit. Just bring in a little layer of orange. Just scruff it in there. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take a step back and look at it. Okay, I hope everybody's loving their sky at this point. Right now, what I want to do is bring the sun, the setting sun, into the sky. So for that, I'm going to switch on over to my small brush, my little detail brush. And I need a little bit more white paint on here. Okay. So with my small brush, first thing I want to do is get just some red paint on there with the small brush. Just get a little bit of red paint on there. And I'm coming just to the left of the center, I'm going to do a little line here. Maybe it's a couple of inches long. A little red line in the sky, right where the sky meets the earth. Just a little line of red, a couple of inches long, like that. Just a little line of red, and then maybe just a tiny bit more red above it. A very thin little line of red above it, and maybe one thin little line of red below it. It's just a bit of red. once you've got your red line there, go ahead and rinse off that brush. Go right into your white paint. And just kind of right in the center of that red, do a little circle of white. Get your sun, your setting sun in there. A little circle of white. And then a few thin little lines of white around that circle. Just stretch out a few little thin lines of white just around that circle. It's a little line of red, a little ball of white sitting on top of it. And then just kind of stretch out that white a little bit around in all directions around that little sun. Now I'm going to create a little reflection in the water with that same small brush. And I'm just going to mix a little, just get a little bit of that sunsetty color that I've been using in the sky on my small brush. A little bit of that sunset color, small brush, coming on down underneath the sun in the water. Just little dashes of light in here. Now, I'm not going to have it go perfectly straight. I want it to kind of come down at an angle here. So little lines, little dashes of sunset color will just kind of make their way off to the right. So dashes. These are short little dashes, making their way off to the right. And maybe one nice big one down at the very bottom. Okay. How's everybody doing? We've got a lot of little steps to this painting. So I'm going to keep going. So now I am going to continue with that small brush.
Is the sun like a circle or a half of the circle?
More of a half circle. The way it, because the red breaks it up at the bottom. So it is more of a half circle. Okay. So actually, I'm going to switch on over to my medium-sized brush at this point. Medium-sized brush. And we're going to need some more purple here. So, blue and red. Have to make some more purple. Okay, so blue and red. Make some purple. I'm mixing the blue and red together. Okay. The first thing I want to do is first to get these trees in here. So I want to do three different trees. The first one starting, let's see, about halfway down the land area. And I'm just going to start by putting a little line in there like this. It's about halfway down the land area. Little line about like that. Just start with a little line. Okay. Actually, I want it to be to the left of the sun. So it might have to go a little bit more to the left. Okay. So now somewhere in that line, just make sure it stays to the left of the sun. Let's have a line coming up from that right on up into the sky to right about here. So a line coming up to the left of the sun. Okay. And once you've got your line in there, you can widen it out at the bottom to give yourself the look of tree branches. I'm sorry, of roots, tree roots. So once you've got your line in there, just let it kind of connect to that first line that you drew in there. Like this. Okay. Now I'm going to do another line over to the left. So a little bit higher up to the left. This is probably just a couple of inches from the very left edge. Same thing, I'm going to do a nice little line. So I went a little bit higher. Get a line in there like that. And then the same thing, straight up. Stopping right around the same area. Coming back in and stretching out those roots so that they connect. Now I'm going to do a third one, somewhere in the center of those, between those two trees, just a little bit further back, I'm going to do another line, maybe just a little smaller than the others, like that, somewhere in the center. And then a line straight up. Maybe stops a little lower than the others. And same thing, stretch it out a little bit at the bottom. Give yourself a little root system. Okay, so we should have 3 trees Some fun little root systems. At least the tree stumps at this point. And now while this is wet, I'm going to let these lines kind of make their way across the canvas. Make some little land areas and make its way across the canvas. Maybe a little bit on the other side too. And we'll put a couple more in here too, dark lines, maybe one at the bottom here, like that. And stop about halfway. And how about one over here too? So just putting a little bit of land in here. While we've got this purple on. I'm not being super neat with this, just kind of painting in some lines here. Just kind of breaking up the land. In fact, this painting really does look best when it's not, you're not super careful with the lines. You just kind of keep them nice and messy. Okay. And just little bits of grass coming up from the land, coming up around the trees. And I'm just using that same small brush, just bringing in some little wispy bits of grass coming up everywhere where there's land. Just bring up little bits of grass. Anywhere there's land. And I am not putting much detail in here. It's just literally just pulling up my brush, not worrying about detail here at all. This is mostly a silhouette anyways. I think the messier you make this, the better it looks. So again, not a lot of detail. Just bringing in some little bits of grass all throughout the bottom part of the painting. Even along this top part where the sky and the water meet, you can add a little bit of just kind of messy foliage in there too. Just kind of mess it up a little bit. I'm just putting little dots, a few little dots back there as if we've got some little trees or something off in the distance, just a few little dots. to break up the skyline. Very messy. And just let your imagination take over back here. All right, just give us a minute. Okay, so now I'm going to finish off the trees right in the front. So I need to have plenty of that purple. So if you're running low on purple, just go ahead and make yourself a little more purple. That's blue and red. And the first thing I want to do is get some Ys coming up in from the top of the trees. So just wherever your tree trunk stops, just kind of bring yourself a little Y, but make it kind of a wobbly Y, not a perfectly straight Y. So, you know, has the feel of a Y, but it's not perfectly straight. And do that at each of these. They can totally overlap. In fact, they kind of have to overlap each other. Okay. So just some wobbly Ys in there. And then just add branches off of those Ys. So what I like to do is just make new Ys out of the ones you already have. So let's say there's another Y right there. See? There's another Y right there. There's another Y right there. So you're building Ys in the form of tree branches kind of coming out. So keep on building branches in the form of wobbly Ys. I mean, you totally could do perfectly straight Ys in here. That wouldn't look bad. I just like the look of the wobbly ones. Now try to get those Ys to come all the way to the top of the sky here. At least some of your Ys, you want to come all the way up to the top of the sky. And they will definitely be overlapping each other. Not to worry. Okay. And we're definitely going to need some more purple in here. And so make sure you've got a good amount of purple on your plate for the next step. Okay, for this next step, it's totally up to you if you want to bring leaves into these trees, because this painting does look really cool with just the branches showing. You could have a beautiful wintry scene here. by just leaving the branches as they are, or a November, December scene. Or you can bring in the leaves, which is what I'm going to do. So to do that, you're going to need more purple, continuing on with that medium-sized brush. And all I'm doing for the leaves is just kind of coming into those Ys and dotting in clumps of leaves. Now I would describe it almost like broccoli, like you would see the green part on broccoli kind of makes its way around the stems. You're bringing in leaves that same way. So just kind of coming in around your Ys and bringing like little clumps of leaves in between. All the way to the top. That's really important. You want to have these leaves go all the way to the top of the sky, to the top of the painting. And you can even have some little clumps in between. So I'm just going to fill in these leaves. Just using a pushing motion with this medium-sized brush. Light pressure. Making sure you go all the way to the top of the sky. Now I'm making sure that some of the sky is still visible behind these leaves. So not completely filling in the whole tree with leaves. I want to still see some of the sky poking through the leaves. It's kind of up to you what that means, how many leaves you want to have. You have to have a few kind of coming down below the tree as well. Okay, I think that's going to be enough leaves for me. Okay, just give me a minute of pause for that. Okay, so at this point I am just going to be adding in some little details, some fun little details into the painting. And maybe working a little bit in the clouds, adding a little bit more detail into the clouds and the sky. But I'm going to start with getting some little trees off in the distance. For that, I'm going to use my smallest detail brush and just go with a little bit of that purple I've been using in the trees. And maybe right over here on the right side, coming up from this land area, just have a couple little trees coming up, little lines coming up. Just small trees, maybe 2 of them next to each other. And why not have a little Y coming up from them? Very simple. Very little detail. And just kind of about it, without worrying about getting much detail at all, just kind of dot in some leaves around that Y. We're going to lighten it up a little bit too. Not much detail back here at all, just kind of dotting in some little leaves around the Y. And maybe a couple little ones coming over here too, even smaller. Just a little hint of trees off in the distance. Don't worry about details here. Just little hints of trees off in the distance. Using that same idea that we used for these trees, just in much less detail. Just a little hint of trees off in the distance. Very little detail. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail to these trees in the background. And I'm not even going to rinse my brush. I'm just going to use a little bit of the sunset color that I have on my brush. I have already on my plate. And just kind of put a few dots of the sunset color into the trees, just to kind of switch up the color a little bit, lighten up the color a bit. Just a few dots of it into the trees off in the background, they're going to get hit a little bit more by the sun. And maybe a few dots of it back here too. So it's just a few dots of the sunset color bouncing off of these trees off in the distance. Okay. Now at this point, we can just play with the details in the painting. So for instance, maybe I'll bring in some more highlights from the sun in here. So a little more sunset color, a little bit more white. And just create a little more definition in the reflection from the sunset. Go a little thicker with that paint. Just some little details in here. Maybe a little more sunset brightness in the sky. You can just kind of play with it a little bit. Maybe some little highlights up in the sky. So everybody's painting is different. At this point, you kind of know, you kind of take a step back and look at your painting. You may take a look at it and say, oh, maybe I need some more highlights in my water, or maybe I need more highlights in my clouds. Everybody's is going to be a little bit different. But overall, this is the basic painting. For those of you who are watching this on video because you lost power, please feel free to call me and if you need any help with these steps as you're watching the recording. And I hope you get power back soon. But let's take a look at these paintings and see what everyone's got.